Let me turn to Haroun Rahimi. He's an associate professor at the American University of Afghanistan and a former research fellow at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. He is an Afghan national, but joins us from Istanbul. Haroun, I have so many questions to ask you, but let me first begin with the G7 meeting. What was it that Afghans wanted to see and hear from this session?
I think there were many concerns, as you pointed out. There's a lot to think through, but I think there was a desire that there would be actions taken to hold Taliban accountable for the treatment of civilians, the issues of women's rights and minority rights. But it appears that the international community, G7 in particular, is primarily focused on the airport situation and the issue of evacuation. It signals that obviously that focus is driven by domestic politics of the G7 countries, but you have to realize that the airport situation is a very tiny part of the overall events that are unfolding in the country. It may affect hundreds of thousands of Afghans, but it certainly doesn't affect millions, 35 million population, who are going to have to live under Taliban rule, going to have to live with the economic consequences of a Taliban takeover of the country. We're going to have to live with the political and other ramifications of the Taliban takeover of the country. And they were hoping for some sort of international kind of acknowledgement that Taliban will be held accountable for some of the promises they've made. There's not been much talk of that.
Haroun, are you in touch with friends and family back in Afghanistan? What are they telling you if you are? And I'm just curious what they're telling you about their reaction to all the promises we've heard from the Taliban in these two news conferences now. Do they buy any of it?
So, I mean, depends mostly on whom you talk to. There are people who are relieved that the fighting has stopped. You have to realize that the country was experiencing brutal war for more than 40 years, a war that Taliban played a major role in. So now the war has stopped in most of the countries just because of the fact that one side prevailed. So that's a welcome relief for a lot of Afghans. It causes them to have hope because they feel like they can go out more freely now. They can travel, something that was much harder to do. They are not afraid of being bombed, droned, something that was a real concern until very recently. There's also even for those people who are kind of relieved that the fighting stopped, there is real fear and anxiety about the future. Half a million Afghans, that's 500,000 households dependent on some sort of government salary. They work for the army, for the education sector and such, and they don't know if they have a job still. They don't know if they're going to get paid or not. The Afghan government budget, more than 50% of it was dependent on foreign aid, something that's going to dry up now. Afghanistan is heavily dependent on aid and import for everything, basically what it consumes, the medicine and everything else. And now the aid is stopped because of the fact that all sorts of travel into country are kind of disrupted right now. United Nations food program said that the people may actually run out of food by September. There's also the fact that the value of Afghani is depreciating because the U.S. has withheld Afghanistan's natural reserves due to the fact that Taliban took over. That means that everything that is important in the country, which is most things, are actually becoming more expensive.
Humanitarian situation, people's livelihoods really up in the air at this point. But before we run out of time, I want to hear about your story. How did you end up in Istanbul, and when did you leave?
Actually, I mean, our university, American University of Aghanistan, was teaching remotely for the past year because of the COVID pandemic. Just sometimes we forget that, but the pandemic is also going on in the country. There was a vaccination efforts that had to be paused now that Taliban took over. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But our university was teaching remotely. I had a chance to actually travel as a visiting research fellow to Oxford Center for Islamic Studies and spend some time researching there while still teaching. I took advantage of that, and our university was scheduled to go back and start some in-person classes by the start of fall. That would have been August 31st. And I was actually traveling back to start in-person classes, hoping that would get to some sort of normalcy. But midway, as you have to go, when you go to Afghanistan, you have to go through a third country. I was going through Istanbul that the events happened. First, Herat, which is my hometown, was surrendered and then later fell, and I decided to just pause here. I've been on a holding pattern, basically moving from Airbnb to Airbnb, trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And every news I get is actually making it harder for me to think about possibly going back. I'm committed to teach. My institution is committed to deliver education, but the future of the country and the future of my generation was the generation that was given a scholarship to come to the United States to study. I did my master's and PhD in the United States and go back and help rebuild the country. I worked as a consultant on development projects. I teach at the American University of Aghanistan. I was the kind of person who was supposed to help make Afghanistan more self-reliant, make Afghanistan kind of come out of this dependency pattern that we had. But that generation now has a hard time seeing a role for themselves in the future of the country.
Well, we're certainly glad you are safe and sound, and we hope you get a chance to go back to your country at some point. Thank you for talking to us.